The murmur of the dining facility was a familiar kind of noise, a low-frequency hum of 1,000 private conversations, the clatter of metal trays on linoleum, and the drone of industrial air conditioning. It was a soundscape Commander Ana Rivera had learned to parse, to filter for anomalies. For the past 72 hours, she had sat at the same small table in the corner, nursing a single cup of black coffee, her eyes scanning not the people, but the patterns, the flow of personnel, the seating arrangements, the subtle shifts in posture when a particular rank entered the room. She was a ghost in sterile, unadorned fatigues, her rank and unit insignia stripped for the duration of this assignment. To the hundreds of Marines, sailors, and airmen on forward operating base Dagger, she was a nobody and administrative officer, maybe a logistics specialist waiting for a flight. Small, quiet, and utterly forgettable. This anonymity was her most effective tool. Her current task was to map the base's informal communication networks, both digital and human, before beginning the real work. She was hunting for a signal, a whisper of illicit data exfiltration that intelligence suggested was originating from this very hub. To find it, she had to understand the rhythm of the place, the pulse of its social heart. The dining facility was that heart. Look at this one. A voice boomed, cutting through the ambient hum like a poorly grounded speaker. 3 days, same spot. Pretty sure that coffee is petrified by now. Rivera didn't react. Her focus remained on the tablet in front of her, which displayed a cascading waterfall of local network traffic. The voice belonged to Gunnery Sergeant Rex Blake, a man who moved through the world as if he were owed it. He was large with a chest puffed out by habit and a jaw that seemed permanently clenched. He wore a trident pin on his uniform, a detail Rivera had noted on day one. A quick check of the records confirmed her suspicion. Blake had attended a joint training exercise with the SEAL team 5 years ago. He had never completed basic underwater demolition SEAL training. He was a fraud, but a loud and confident one. And on a base this remote, confidence was often mistaken for competence. He stood over her table, flanked by 2 corporals who mirrored his swaggering posture. They were his audience and his echo. Blake leaned forward, planting his meaty hands on her table. The scent of stale sweat and cheap energy drinks washed over her. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Lieutenant," he said, deliberately demoting her. "Or whatever you are. You got a name." Rivera slowly looked up from her tablet. Her gaze was level, her expression neutral. She didn't offer a name, a rank, or a justification. She simply met his eyes, a silent question in her own. Her silence was a vacuum, and Blake rushed to fill it with more noise. "What's the matter? Keck out your tongue," he laughed. A harsh barking sound. The corporals chuckled on cue. "You know, on a real team, that kind of disrespect gets you put in your place. I'm a Navy SEAL. We don't tolerate disrespect." The lie was so bald, so easily disproven that it was almost fascinating. He used it as a shield and a hammer, a claim to an authority he had not earned. Several nearby tables had gone quiet. The diners were watching the confrontation unfold. A welcome distraction from the monotony of deployment. "Stand up when a senior non-commissioned officer is addressing you," Blake commanded, his voice hardening. He was playing to the crowd now establishing dominance. Rivera remained seated. Her stillness was absolute. It wasn't defiance. It was a conscious decision to de-escalate by refusing to provide a reactive surface. She had learned long ago that men like Blake fed on reaction. Fear, anger, indignation, it was all fuel. Starved of it, they often became clumsy. Her lack of response seemed to enrage him more than any verbal retort could have. His face reddened. He had committed himself to this public spectacle and could not back down without losing face. "You think you're better than us," he snarled, leaning closer. "You're some kind of spook. Too good to talk to a grunt." He gestured around the room. "These are the people who do the real work. You should show some damn respect." Still, she said nothing. Her heart rate was a steady 62 beats per minute. Her breathing was even. She was observing, recording, analyzing Blake's posture, the shifting weight of his feet, the slight tremor in his hand. It was all data. He was telegraphing his every move. Frustrated, his ego bruised by her impenetrable calm, he made his final foolish move. "Fine, have it your way." He drew his arm back, his intention clear. The motion was wide, sloppy, powered by anger rather than technique. It was the punch of a bully, not a warrior. The incident, as she would later log it, was over before it began. As his fist traveled toward her, Rivera didn't flinch. She simply shifted her weight to her left, a subtle, economic movement. His punch, aimed at where her head had been a fraction of a second before, sailed through empty air. His own momentum, unchecked and poorly balanced, carried him stumbling past her chair. He caught himself on an adjacent table, rattling trays and sloshing drinks, his face a mask of shocked fury. The two corporals froze, their smirks vanishing. The ambient noise of the dining facility had evaporated completely. 100 pairs of eyes were now locked on the scene. In the ringing silence, Rivera slowly rose to her feet. She picked up her tablet and her coffee cup. She looked not at Blake, but through the space he had occupied. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away. Her steps measured and unhurried. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The first phase of the data collection was complete. The anomaly had revealed itself. Back in the sterile confines of her workspace, a converted storage closet designated SCF for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, Commander Rivera set down her tablet. The room was small, cold, and smelled of ozone from the humming servers that were her only companions. This was her sanctuary, a place of pure data, where human emotion was just another variable to be quantified. The red strobe of a server rack blinked rhythmically, casting a crimson pulse across the Spartan room. She sat at her terminal, the glow of the monitors reflecting in her dark, focused eyes. Her first action was not to report the assault. It was to document. She accessed the base's internal network. Her credentials, granting her access to a level of surveillance the base commander himself was likely unaware of. She pulled up the video feed from Dining Facility Camera 7, the one mounted on the wall directly opposite her table. The footage was clear. She isolated the relevant 90-second clip, timestamping it from the moment Blake and his cronies approached her table to the moment she walked out of frame. The video was damning. It showed their aggressive posturing, Blake leaning over her, his voice clearly audible on the directional microphone embedded in the camera housing. It showed her stillness, her refusal to engage. And it showed in undeniable clarity, Blake drawing back his arm and throwing the punch that met only air. She saved the file, encrypting it with a 256-bit key. She then opened a new document, a standard incident report form. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with quiet efficiency. Date, October 22nd. Time, 1847. Location, FOB Dagger, Dining Facility 1. Subject, Gunnery Sergeant Blake, Rex. Service number 8675309. Incident, unsolicited physical contact initiated by Gunnery Sergeant Blake. Subject demonstrated verbal aggression and attempted to strike the undersigned. Action taken. Evasive maneuver. Disengagement. Witnesses approximately 75 to 100 personnel present in vicinity. She attached the encrypted video file. Then she saved the report to a secure partition drive. She did not send it. Not yet. Escalation was a tool, not an impulse. The moment to use it had not arrived. Procedure dictated that a formal report should be filed through the chain of command, but her command structure was not on this base. She was a guest, an observer. To file a report now would be to invite scrutiny into her own mission. Blake had made a move. The correct response was to wait for him to make another. People like him always did. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the servers wash over her. She visualized the encounter again not as a threat, but as a system of forces. His momentum her pivot. The energy he had expended wasted the potential energy she had conserved. It was a principle she applied to everything from CQB to electronic warfare. Absorb, analyze, redirect. On a small bare patch of her desk, next to a hardened external drive, sat a single object, a small tarnished metal disc. It was an old challenge coin, its details worn smooth by time and touch. On one side was the faint outline of a phoenix rising from flames. Around the edge, almost illegible, was the Latin motto of her unit, Fides in Tenebris, faith in darkness. It was a reminder that clarity was often found in the most obscure, chaotic environments. She picked it up, the cool metal of familiar weight in her palm. This base was a form of darkness, a place of tangled loyalties and hidden signals. Blake was just noise. Her job was to find the signal within that noise. A soft chime indicated a secure message had arrived on her terminal. It was from Chief Warrant Officer David Hayes, her direct support, and the only other person on this base who knew who she truly was. The message read, DAC noise level dropped 12 decibels at 1800 Zulu correlated with social media chatter spike. You good? Hayes was her conscience deputy, the human element that kept her grounded in a world of algorithms and signal intelligence. He saw the patterns in people while she saw them in data. Together, they formed a complete picture. She typed her reply. Situation nominal. Data point acquired. A moment later, the door to the SCIF hissed open. Hayes stepped inside, his lanky frame seeming to fill the small space. He was older with lines of quiet humor etched around his eyes. He held 2 steaming mugs. Nominal, huh? He said, handing her one. The aroma of strong, fresh coffee filled the air. I pulled the logs. The name Blake Rex has been flagged for disciplinary issues 17 times in the last 2 years. Mostly bar fights, disorderly conduct, but the last one is interesting. He was formally reprimanded for wearing an unearned qualification insignia, a trident. Rivera took a slow sip of the coffee. She said nothing, letting him connect the dots. So the guy who claims to be a SEAL to intimidate you is the same guy who got in trouble for pretending to be a SEAL. Hayes mused. Theatricality is a powerful drug. He looked at her, his expression serious. He's going to escalate, Anna. He can't let this go. You embarrassed him by not fighting back. I know, she said, her voice quiet. It was the first time she had spoken in over an hour. That is the next data point I need to collect. Hayes nodded slowly. He understood her methods. It wasn't about winning a fight. It was about understanding a system by applying a precise stimulus and observing the reaction. Blake was the stimulus. His inevitable overreaction would illuminate the basis's power structures, its fault lines, and the pathways of its informal justice. Just be ready, Hayes advised. Documentation is a shield, but sometimes you still have to block. Rivera looked at the Phoenix coin in her hand, then back at the screen. The network traffic was returning to its baseline rhythm. The disturbance was over, but the ripples were still spreading. She was ready. Preparation was a permanent state of being. Gunnery Sergeant Blake's humiliation festered. In the hyper-masculine ecosystem of the forward operating base, being shown up by a small, silent woman was a wound that could not be left untended. His cronies, Corporals Davis and Martinez, were no help. Their nervous laughter and embellished retellings of the event in the barracks only magnified his embarrassment. He had swung and missed, not just at her, but at the very foundation of the persona he had so carefully constructed. The trident on his chest felt heavier, a monument to a lie that she had somehow exposed without saying a word. So he did what bullies do when their physical intimidation fails. He turned to the system. The next morning, Blake, with Davis and Martinez as his corroborating witnesses, filed a formal complaint with the base sergeant major. Their story was a masterpiece of inversion. They claimed that the unknown female officer had been acting suspiciously, possibly conducting unauthorized surveillance in the dining facility when Blake, as a concerned senior NCO, had politely questioned her. She had become belligerent and insubordinate. She had, they alleged, threatened him with a cryptic remark about his career being over before standing up in a menacing manner, forcing him to take a step back in self-defense. The system, by its nature, had to respond. Colonel Mitchell, the base commander, was a pragmatic and fair-minded officer, but he was also a stickler for procedure. A formal complaint, especially one involving an officer and an enlisted man, had to be investigated. He had no file on a Commander Rivera. Her presence on his base was on a need-to-know basis, and officially, he did not need to know. She was listed as a temporary liaison from the Department of the Navy, a vague title that covered a multitude of sins. Rivera was formally notified of the complaint via a summon to the commander's office. She read the digital message from Colonel Mitchell, her expression unchanging. The escalation had come exactly as she had predicted. Blake was not just noise. He was a predictable waveform. She spent the next few hours in her element preparing not for a legal battle, but for the inevitable physical one. She went to the base's training complex, a series of warehouses and outdoor structures. Her destination was the dive tank facility, a place rarely used by the predominantly Marine and Air Force personnel. It was her domain. The deep, silent water was where she recalibrated, a place where the physics were pure and unforgiving. For an hour, she performed breath-hold exercises in the cold, chlorinated water, the pressure of familiar embrace. She moved through the water with the fluid efficiency of a creature born to it. Her movements slow, deliberate, and powerful. It was a form of meditation, a way of stripping away the distracting clutter of the surface world and focusing on the core principles of control, breath, pressure, balance. When she emerged, dripping and renewed, she saw them. Blake, Davis, and Martinez were waiting for her near the facility's exit. They stood blocking the narrow walkway, their postures radiating a smug, predatory confidence. They believed their formal complaint had given them the upper hand. They thought she was cornered, officially reprimanded, and vulnerable. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Blake sneered, his arms crossed over his chest. His trident pin glinted in the harsh afternoon sun. Or what crawled out of the pool? Heard you had a little chat with the command staff, ma'am. He used the honorific like a weapon, dripping with sarcasm. Seems like disrespecting a senior NCO has consequences. Rivera paused, her wet hair clinging to her face. She held a small gear bag in one hand. She said nothing, her gaze sweeping past them, assessing the environment. Concrete walkway 10 feet wide, a chain-link fence on one side, the solid wall of the building on the other. 2 external security cameras were mounted high on the wall, their small red lights indicating they were active. She noted their angles, their fields of view. We're just here to make sure you understand the lesson, Davis added, taking a step forward. Around here, we police our own. You need to learn your place. They began to close in a classic 3-point envelopment. It was clumsy telegraphed, but for most people, it would have been terrifyingly effective. They were using their size and numbers to intimidate, to create an overwhelming sense of threat. They expected her to shrink, to apologize, to show fear. This was the moment of pivot, the point where potential energy becomes kinetic. Martinez, the one on her left, reached for her gear bag. Let's see what kind of spook stuff you've got in here. His hand never made it. As his fingers extended, Rivera moved. It wasn't a burst of speed, but a seamless transition from stillness to motion. She pivoted on the ball of her right foot, the movement originating from her hips. Her body flowed around Martinez's outstretched arm. Instead of blocking it, she guided it, her right hand cupping his elbow, her left securing his wrist. She continued her pivot, using his own forward momentum against him. It wasn't a throw, it was a redirection. Martinez found himself pulled off balance, his arm locked in a position of excruciating control. A slight increase in pressure from her thumb on a nerve cluster in his wrist sent a jolt of white-hot pain up his arm, and he dropped to one knee with a choked gasp. Davis, seeing his companion go down, charged from her right, his reaction pure, undisciplined rage. He was a bull charging a red cape. Rivera released Martinez and flowed into Davis's charge. As his shoulder lowered, telegraphing a tackle, she stepped aside like a matador. Her hands found his uniform collar and belt. Using his own momentum, she executed a perfect hip toss. The technique was textbook, economical, and devastating. Davis found himself airborne for a fraction of a second before slamming into the concrete with a bone-jarring impact. The air rushed out of his lungs in a harsh wheeze. Blake, seeing his 2 subordinates neutralized in the space of heartbeats, hesitated. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a dawning realization that he was no longer the predator in this encounter. But his pride, his need to maintain face, drove him forward. He came at her directly, relying on size and aggression. It was exactly what she expected. Rivera stepped into his charge. As his hands reached for her shoulders, she dropped low, sweeping his lead leg, while simultaneously driving her shoulder into his midsection. The takedown was flawless. Blake's feet left the ground, and he crashed down hard, his back striking the pavement with a dull thud. Rivera stood up, her breathing as even and calm as it had been in the bottom of the dive pool. She looked down at the 3 men. Martinez was nursing his wrist, his face pale with pain and shock. Davis was slowly untangling himself, a dazed look in his eyes. Blake was pushing himself up, his face a mask of incandescent fury and utter disbelief. She didn't offer a word, not a taunt or a warning. The action had been its own statement. She picked up her gear bag, which she had dropped at the start of the engagement. She gave the two security cameras a brief, almost imperceptible glance. Then she turned and continued on her way, leaving the three of them in a stunned, silent tableau of their own making. The ripples from her stimulus had just become a wave. The story of the encounter outside the dive tank spread across the base like a grass fire. But this time, the narrative was different. It wasn't about Blake's bravado or the strange silent officer. It was a story of impossible speed and chilling efficiency. The few who had witnessed it from a distance struggled to describe what they saw. One said it was like watching a magic trick. Another compared it to a ballet, but with consequences. The mockery that had followed Rivera evaporated, replaced by a mixture of confusion, fear, and a dawning, grudging respect. Blake and his cronies became objects of ridicule, their fabricated story about her insubordination now seeming absurd. Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a senior instructor at the base's small training cadre, had been one of those witnesses. A veteran of countless combat deployments, Rodriguez was a man who had forgotten more about fighting than most people ever learn. He recognized what he had seen not as a brawl, but as a masterclass in control and restraint. He had seen her neutralize three larger aggressive men without throwing a single punch, without causing any significant injury, and without losing her composure for a fraction of a second. It was the work of a professional of the highest caliber. His sense of duty overriding any reluctance to get involved, Rodriguez went directly to Colonel Mitchell's office. He was admitted without delay. "Sir," Rodriguez began, standing at attention before the colonel's desk, "I need to make a statement regarding the complaint against the visiting naval officer." Colonel Mitchell looked up, his expression weary. "Master Chief, I have a signed report from a gunnery sergeant and two corporals. It's a mess, but I have to follow procedure." "With respect, sir, their report is a fabrication," Rodriguez said, his voice firm. "I was there outside the dive facility. I saw the whole thing. Gunnery Sergeant Blake and his men instigated. They blocked her path. They were verbally abusive and they moved to physically assault her." Mitchell leaned forward. His interest piqued. "And what did she do?" "She corrected the situation." "Sir," Rodriguez said, choosing his words carefully, "it was the most disciplined application of minimal force I have ever witnessed. It was over in seconds. She was never the aggressor. She was in complete control from start to finish. Whoever she is, Colonel, she is not the problem here." The weight of a Master Chief's testimony was not something a commander could ignore. Mitchell thanked Rodriguez and dismissed him. He sat back in his chair, staring at the two conflicting narratives on his screen. One, a formal complaint from 3 Marines. The other, an eyewitness account from one of the most respected senior enlisted men on the base. It was time to get to the bottom of this. He summoned Commander Rivera to his office. She arrived promptly, her uniform now dry, her composure as placid as ever. Chief Warrant Officer Hayes accompanied her, standing silently by the door. Commander Mitchell began his tone. "All business. I find myself with a significant discrepancy in my reports. I have a formal complaint from Gunnery Sergeant Blake alleging insubordination and threatening behavior on your part. I now have a countervailing statement from Master Chief Rodriguez, who claims you were the victim of an unprovoked assault which you handled with, and I quote, exemplary discipline." He steepled his fingers, his eyes boring into her. "I need to know what happened." In your own words, Rivera did not offer a story. She did not provide her own version of events. Instead, she stepped forward and placed a small hardened data stick on the polished surface of his desk. It was black, unmarked, and exuded a sense of professional gravity. "Sir," she said, her voice calm and even, "my full report regarding the initial incident in the dining facility was compiled and timestamped 60 seconds after it occurred. It includes a video file from the facility's internal security system." She paused, then gestured to the stick. "That drive contains my initial report. It also contains the complete, unedited video footage from cameras Alpha and Bravo overlooking the training facility walkway, recorded this afternoon. The audio is faint, but their words are clear enough." Colonel Mitchell stared at the data stick, then at her. She wasn't defending herself. She was providing evidence. There was a profound difference. The silence in the room was thick with implication. Hayes remained by the door, his expression unreadable, but for a flicker of grim satisfaction in his eyes. "You've had this all along?" Mitchell asked, a note of incredulity in his voice. "Documentation precedes action," sir. Rivera replied simply. It is my standard operating procedure. The colonel picked up the drive as if it were a piece of unexploded ordnance. He looked from Rivera's calm face to Hayes's watchful one. He was beginning to realize that this was not a simple disciplinary issue. He was dealing with something, and someone far outside his normal frame of reference. The quiet, unassuming officer was not just a competent fighter. She was a meticulous operator. Blake hadn't just picked a fight. He had stumbled into a carefully prepared trap made of his own actions. Very well, Commander, Mitchell said, his voice clipped. We will review this evidence. I am convening an informal hearing. Be there at 0800 tomorrow. You are all going to have your say. He looked directly at her. And so will the cameras. The operation center was dark, the only light coming from the glow of monitors and a large holographic map of the region that shimmered in the center of the room. It was not a courtroom, but for the purposes of this hearing, it possessed an even greater gravity. This was the nerve center of the base, a place of unvarnished truth and critical decisions. Colonel Mitchell sat at the head of a large conference table. Master Chief Rodriguez was present, as were Gunnery Sergeant Blake and his two corporals, Davis and Martinez. They sat stiffly, their earlier bravado replaced by a sullen apprehension. Commander Rivera sat opposite them, with Chief Warrant Officer Hayes seated a respectful distance behind her. She was, as always, a picture of calm neutrality. This is not a court-martial, Colonel Mitchell began, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. This is an Article 15 hearing to resolve conflicting reports and determine the facts. Everyone here will have a chance to speak. But first, we are going to review the evidence provided to my office. He nodded to a technician who tapped a few commands into a console. The main screen at the front of the room, usually displaying reconnaissance feeds or logistical data, flickered to life. The first video began to play. It was the footage from the dining facility. The image was sharp, the audio surprisingly clear. The room watched in silence as the scene unfolded exactly as Rivera had experienced it. Blake's aggressive approach, his taunts about being a SEAL, his demands that she stand, her complete lack of reaction, and then the clumsy, furious punch meeting nothing but air. Blake's face went from pale to ashen as he watched his own aggression play out in high definition. Davis and Martinez fidgeted in their seats, refusing to look at the screen. Gunnery, Sergeant Blake, Mitchell said without taking his eyes off the video. Does this footage accurately depict the events in the dining facility? Blake swallowed hard. Sir, she was being disrespectful. The video doesn't show her attitude. The video shows you initiating physical contact. Mitchell corrected him, his voice like ice. Let's proceed to the second incident. The technician switched feeds. Now the screen showed two angles from the walkway outside the dive tank. The scene was just as Master Chief Rodriguez had described it. The video showed the three men blocking Rivera's path. The directional microphones picked up their words, faint but distinct. We're just here to make sure you understand the lesson. Then came the pivot. The screen showed Martinez reaching and the impossibly fluid, precise sequence of movements that followed. The controlled takedowns, the perfect redirection of momentum, the complete absence of wasted motion. It was not a fight. It was a surgical procedure. The entire room, save for Rivera and Hayes, watched with a kind of stunned awe. The 8-second clinic in applied biomechanics ended with Blake on the ground and Rivera standing over him completely unharmed and unruffled. The video ended. The screen went blank. The silence in the operations center was absolute. The evidence was not just compelling. It was irrefutable. It didn't just contradict Blake's story, it annihilated it. Colonel Mitchell finally turned his gaze upon the gunnery sergeant. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of command. Gunnery Sergeant Blake, you filed a false official report. You initiated 2 separate physical altercations. You have repeatedly misrepresented your military qualifications to intimidate your fellow service members. And you have brought profound dishonor upon your uniform and the Marine Corps. This command does not tolerate bullies, and it certainly does not tolerate liars. The sentence was swift. Reduction in rank to sergeant, forfeiture of pay, extra duties for the maximum allowable period, a permanent damning letter in his file that would effectively end his career. Davis and Martinez received similar, though slightly less severe, punishments. They had been followers, but they were still culpable. Then Mitchell turned his attention to Rivera. He gestured to the technician who brought up a new file on the main screen. It was Rivera's unredacted service record. The room stared at the screen. Commander Ana Rivera, United States Navy, and below her name, a unit designation that made Blake's blood run cold. Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Special Projects Division. The screen was filled with commendations, citations for valor, and a list of specialized schools and qualifications so long and esoteric it was barely comprehensible. Her expertise was listed as C4I/EW in direct action support. And there, next to her unit name, was its emblem, a phoenix rising from flames, the symbol of a Tier 1 entity, so secret most people in the room didn't even know it existed. For the clarification of everyone in this room, Colonel Mitchell announced, his voice ringing with authority. Commander Rivera is here on my direct authority, executing a mission of the highest priority, one that is vital to the security of every single person on this base. Your reckless and unprofessional behavior. Sergeant Blake placed that mission and all of us at significant risk. Mitchell stood up. He faced Rivera. He brought his heels together and rendered a salute so sharp it seemed to cut the air. Your restraint and professionalism under duress were exemplary. Commander, you are a credit to your uniform and your command. Master Chief Rodriguez immediately stood and saluted. The other officers and technicians in the room followed suit. The sound of their hands striking their brows in unison was a sharp percussive report. Finally, his face a grim mask of defeat, the newly demoted Sergeant Blake was ordered to his feet. He stood, his shoulders slumped, and rendered the slowest, most painful salute of his life. It was the salute of a man forced to recognize the authority he had mocked, the competence he had mistaken for weakness. It was a silent public apology offered upward from the ruins of his own arrogance. The hearing was over. The signal you've been hunting, the exfiltration. We think we've isolated the protocol it's using. It's polymorphic, hiding in the noise of the base's logistics network. Rivera's attention shifted immediately. The incident with Blake was already receding, filed away as a closed case. Her focus was back on the mission. The next challenge was already loading. She looked at the main monitor where the waterfall of data was still cascading. But now she knew what she was looking for. The noise was no longer random. She could see the faint outlines of a pattern. A ghost in the machine. The room was quieter now, not just in decibels, but in its very atmosphere. An institutional imbalance had been righted. The culture of the base had been subtly, but significantly improved. A bully had been exposed not by superior force, but by superior discipline and unimpeachable proof. Rivera sat down at her terminal. Before diving into the new data, she opened one final window, a secure communication link to her own off-site command. She typed a short final entry to close out the incident file concerning Sergeant Blake. The message was minimal, precise, and contained everything that needed to be said. Consisted of 4 words.